So now that being said, let's really get into this. While I fix this error that I made in the background, but today was a really, really big day. And so Patty, for you to reach number 53, and rank that high in the nation, that's not by accident. And we already know it's 21 years of hard work that you've put in, blood, sweat, and tears into your business. But you have really made it a point to really hone your craft and become an expert in what you do. And we just came off of a 2-day Fed meeting that ended earlier today. And today's a really big day for your industry. So for all of you who do not know why Patty Goodspeed is the GOAT, can you please give us an update and tell us what happened and why and all of the things?
So, I mean, after 3 weeks of interest rates rising, headlines really making home buyers feel discouraged, and not discouraged necessarily because of the payments, because they still qualify for what they want to purchase. For the people that are applying, for the people that have started that process. But the problem is, with 3 weeks of ongoing and continuous back-to-back headlines that are telling them affordability is an all-time low, renting is cheaper than buying a house has become a luxury, it's impossible for you to make this happen. It's been really a big damper. And you hear it from real estate agents where there's less leads to convert, there are less conversations that are taking place, and less confidence in the market. Long time ago on our webinar, I shared an economic report with multiple economic academics, experts across the country that really talked about something that we don't talk about enough, which is consumer confidence. Consumer confidence by itself plays a major role in what happens, consumer behavior. So when you have a bunch of these, I'm sorry, I finished that sentence properly. Consumer confidence plays a significant role in what impacts demand. And of course, the behavior in the market, which can affect a lot of different things, how a realtor shows up, how a seller shows up. And so all of those factors matter. And when you have headline after headline after headline for 3 weeks in a row saying that mortgage rates are going up and affordability is at an all-time low, if you're a home buyer, you're like, man, I just want to sit this one out. And that's exactly what's been happening. So just as a quick recap, last year when the market was expecting the Fed could hike again in 2023, interest rates peaked over 8.03%. And then after Jerome Powell really dissolved any fears and concerns that the general market had that there would be another rate hike, basically what they were calling at that time prematurely a Fed pivot, that drove interest rates from 8.03% back down to 6.375% heading into 2024. And at that time, the probability of a rate cut in March was 90%, guys. So imagine that you are looking at the headlines, even when it's good, you can't trust what they're talking about because there was a 90% chance of a cut in March. Raise your hand if you saw a cut in March. You didn't. All you saw between the February and now is diminishing probabilities for a rate cut. So today, what Kalani is alluding to is the Fed meeting. So for the 6th consecutive Fed meeting, rates remain unchanged. They didn't cut and they didn't hike. And Jerome Powell actually did do a good thing by saying in the press conference that they're not going to be expecting another hike. This was an important thing. The words that comes out of his mouth for the last 6 meetings has completely swayed the market. You notice I said that the rate has remained unchanged for the 6th consecutive Fed meeting. However, if you look at mortgage rates, they've gone anywhere from 6.25% up way over 8% across the last 6 or 7 months. So what you're seeing is the market responds to what they think the Federal Reserve policy will be. And as a result of that response, then consumer confidence goes up and down. It's all a bunch of predictions and it's all a bunch of bets. And all of that information that you see on the headlines needs to be balanced with the truth, the fundamental truth. So that means that you would know if you're paying attention, whether it's through my newsletter or on the webinar or through this show, you're going to understand that as we see news coming up and down from the Fed, until they're talking about rate cuts seriously and the Federal Reserve themselves open their mouth and talk about that, you're not going to want to bet on the headlines. At the beginning of this year, we would have expected that there would have been 6 rate cuts in 2024. When people were talking about that and I was adamantly against it, everyone hated my voice in that room. But the problem was they have to stick to the fundamental truths we've been saying repeatedly. There was no chance of 6 rate cuts in 2024 with where the economy was headed. So Jerome Powell did reiterate today that they want to continue to work towards their 2% inflation goal. That goal of getting us back down to 2%, I want you to understand, if you're watching this from the perspective of real estate sales and you want rates to go down because you want sales to increase, you're forgetting about the multiple millions of Americans that are struggling to put food on their tables, struggling for the cost of eggs, struggling to fill up the gas tank. Inflation is a much larger problem than the real estate industry. So I'd like to shift that paradigm to make sure everybody understands that the Federal Reserve's tight stance on their monetary policy is valid and necessary. And I'd argue that they're doing a pretty good job. Now, this meeting helped the bond market go up a little over 40 points today. So what happens when the bond market goes up, Kelani?
Interest rates go down, Patty.
Yes, so mortgage rates actually improved. So there was a very slight improvement today after several days of increases. So it balanced things out. It doesn't mean rates are coming down significantly. It balanced things out. The overall 30-year fix is still well over 7.4%. But here's what it means. It means that there must have been some nugget that Jerome Powell gave today that enforced some confidence in the markets. And that is relative to quantitative tightening and quantitative easing. So I'm going to try to simplify this as much as possible. So Jerome Powell says that they're going to continue their runoff. And when you hear that, most people are like, what does that mean? It essentially means that when the Federal Reserve decides to buy assets, they're buying securities, what they're doing is they're putting more money into the market for circulation. And they've slowed that process down. So when they're saying that, hey, we're going to slow down the process of slowing that process down, that means that they're pretty confident that inflation is showing signs of improvement. And in order to keep the markets balanced, to avoid a recession, that they're going to do what it takes to the money supply so that that tightening loosens up just a very little bit. And that gave the markets a little bit of confidence. Now, I would caution you, as I stated on threads with many people, nobody interacted with, which is no problem. But what happens on there, tell people like, hey, listen, if you're watching this Fed meeting today, looking at the bond market, you might want to lock that rate if you're under contract and you're going to close within the next 15 days, because on Friday, we have a big job report. Today's ADP report came out, and that ADP report revealed that there was 192 jobs created, okay? So the 192 jobs that were created was higher than
192,000?
192,000, excuse me. Yeah. 192,000 new jobs created, a large majority of those being in the hospitality and leisure sector. And that was above 180. So when you have ADP, which is a little bit more of an accurate report showing numbers of new jobs being created above expectations, you can expect that the job report, the big BLS job report that's going to come out on Friday, will also mirror that and maybe even higher, because the household survey that's done on the BLS report, the big job report that comes out on Friday, is essentially making a bunch of phone calls to see how many people in that household are working. Usually that number comes in higher than what we see for ADP. So the Federal Reserve did say that they are looking to see if there's any signs of weakness in the labor market that would probably give some sort of motivation towards a rate cut. So of higher for longer rates at the Fed level before they consider a cut. So overall, this was good news for the bond market. There was nothing that was drastic or overly hawkish bond market into a frenzy. But what we did see was a little bit of hope, saying that, hey, we're seeing things move in the right direction. Nothing to justify a cut and nothing to justify a hike, and stay tuned for those job numbers. So you want to watch really closely. If you get under contract and you have to close within a short period of time, you definitely want to lock before Friday's job report, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Lock before Friday's job report. Got it. You know what? First of all, thank you for delivering that so concisely. I can't help but feel like the worst, for lack of better terms, is yet to come. How possible is a soft landing? Every single time that there's been a market correction, historically, if we are looking at the data, there is it's paired with a recession. And so, I mean, are we really able to get out of all of this softly, or is the government just taking longer to rip the Band-Aid off at this point?
Well, if you look at what's happening right now and you look at the numbers, the economy is doing pretty well. So I don't think anybody expected that that if we were in a 5 to 5.25% interest rate environment, higher for longer, at the Fed level for this amount of time, that we would not have seen a crash, something harsh or something breaking. We did see small signs of slowing down in the GDP growth, which is welcomed. Those are signs that you want to see. And we're seeing a little bit of weakness. I would say small signs of, there's more signs of conflicting information in the job market than I would call weakness at this point. So what you're seeing is historically very low unemployment rates, along with moderate wage growth. And you're also seeing that people are still spending money. They have the money to spend, and this is not crippling the economy. So I would argue that the chances of a soft landing and avoiding a recession are pretty high based on how the Federal Reserve is pacing their monetary policy. Now, I do think that we need to pay attention to what they're doing with the runoff. We need to pay attention to, you see, the government is spending a great amount of money. Jerome Powell reiterated today in the press conference that they don't care about election year. We don't know how true that is on this side of the equation, but the Federal Reserve did confirm that, hey, we do not care about the presidential election year. That has never been a factor in our policy, right? So if you kind of read Joe Biden's tweets in combination with what's actually happening in the economy, that might make a little bit of sense. So it's a little believable. But to answer your question more directly about a soft landing, I would say that, hey, nothing's breaking, and interest rates have been higher for longer than we expected, especially with the way that inflation was improving earlier this year. And I would say that we're on pace to avoid any sort of major worrisome large recession if we just base it on what's happening today. The economy has proven to be extremely resilient, and people are still making a lot of money in the stock market, and home prices are up 6.4% from this time last year. So everything's pretty much going well and not breaking. So I'd like to say that that kind of supports the idea of a soft landing.
I don't know. To me, I feel like the sentiment, just from a consumer perspective, is kind of been like, low, when or down, like people are losing their jobs, even though the ADP report shows that they're creating more jobs, and people can't afford groceries. I think what you're seeing as far as like affordability is a lot of people borrowing, taking money for 401ks, putting stuff on credit, and kind of putting band-aids over things right now. That's what I'm seeing from a personal finance perspective. So I think it's hard for people to think in terms of like these big economic like conditions that are going on, because in their pockets they're not feeling, number one, they're paying more for groceries. Number two, they probably haven't gotten raises to keep up with the rate of inflation, so they're making less essentially. And I think that's a sentiment that we're feeling a lot, and that people are telling me about. So, everything that you're saying, I know makes 100% sense, but like personal finance down to an individual level, I don't think it's really trickled down.
No, you're absolutely right. You're highlighting what's referred to in those reports as a consumer sentiment. There have been if you survey someone on Twitter right now and you've got 100,000 followers, you're going to have 80% of those people tell you that they are certainly feeling the tight monetary policy and the impacts of that. And that's also revealed in the job reports, because when someone loses a job, it's actually taking them a lot longer to find a new one. So they're staying unemployed for longer periods of time than they can. The number of people who are job hopping is going down. Job hopping in your sector, especially as an influencer with the topics that you talk about, you'll talk about switching companies every 2 years. Maybe not in the nursing profession, but certainly in the tech profession, where people would get a job and then every 2 years they would switch jobs. And as they're switching jobs, they would get paid more and more and more. And it's like an upward plan. Well, you're seeing a lot less of that. You are not wrong. In the tech community, I serve the Silicon Valley area. We're seeing a lot of buyers lose confidence. I just had a client who got a $2 million bonus, a signed offer letter from Elon Musk himself with a $2 million sign-on bonus, get laid off in the middle of our transaction. So it is happening. No, the layoffs are happening and people are feeling it, and other companies are experiencing lack of growth. So we're not seeing a bunch of jobs being created for computer sciences and PhDs, and we're seeing a large majority of those new jobs in hospitality, in leisure, and those are not those type of jobs that, necessarily people will raise their hand and say, I can afford home ownership because I'm working at a hotel or I'm working in a restaurant, right? So that's a very real problem. Those wages are not sufficient to meet the demands that inflation is creating. So what you're talking about is clearly highlighting what a large majority of Americans are feeling. And my message on that note is that, listen, that is going to be the reality of our future. I told you guys last week, and I'll say it again, the number one cause for inflation is government spending. That government spending is not going anywhere. The government spending and the interest payments that the government has to pay is going to have some sort of impact on the monetary policy. And I don't know how that dynamic works, but there has to be a little bit of pressure for a rate cut. So I do believe that we will see one rate cut in 2024. I do believe that government spending is the number one cause for inflation. And I do believe that inflation is going to be a long-term problem. It's not going to be solved in the short term. It's not going to be solved by starting to cut rates as late this year and early next year. We're just going to keep repeating this cycle. In order for home ownership and other investing or certain lifestyles to be affordable, you do have to focus on creating more sources of income, because the likelihood of income increasing is much higher than the likelihood of home prices coming down and the cost of goods and services over time becoming more affordable.
100%.